Um, it's very interesting for me to take part in this way, and it's the first time for me to be lecturing on Zoom, and for also for that reason, I'm very happy to share this platform, but also because it's very much in the UNStudio philosophy. The UNStudio means United Network, and we very much believe in working as a network of different expertises and different perspectives, and the diversity that we all bring in that way is very much, yeah, part of our work as well. And that work again is very much informed by a way of thinking, and also a certain social aspiration that we have with our work. So it's all interwoven, and that's also why I like very much the title Perspectives of the Digital, because there's not we're not going to promote one view or have one very strong philosophy idea about it. It is a very faceted understanding, I think, we have of how this technology can relate to architecture, and how we want to use it in our practice, and how we feel architecture can reflect even on it, and helping us to make that world a little bit better, as we still try to do when we practice. Next slide, please. So UNStudio, as can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So these are some of the projects Marco also mentioned, in particularly one that Marco also knows very, very well personally, of course, the Mercedes-Benz Museum, which some part of your previous life was dedicated to. So UNStudio, from the beginning, in a way, from the inception, even before UNStudio, also the architectural practice that I started with Ben van Berkel van Berkel Bos, had this strong engagement with at that time, the newest technology in the shape of the Erasmus Bridge. So you could say these are three key projects. They're key projects for many reasons, but also for the relationship with technology. And UNStudio, next slide, has been yeah, has developed also on that. Has developed an understanding of technology as also very much part of our society. So we use it not really so much as a design instrument, but to us it is a way of being relevant, of being of our time. And it started very much with this very first project. One of the very first projects we were engaged in, the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam. Here, for the first time, we used a then advanced computer system to work out the bridge, which is not a straightforward design. It has some complexity, and we use that computer system to reduce the complexity to to some very basic geometric forms, so that it could be worked out. And by that, we what was very interesting to us, that well, we made it possible for this to be built at all, which would not have been possible at that time if we had used the simple drawing system that was still very much in practice in architecture at that time. It was possible to control the quality, to to align all the different stakeholders in the process, because we all shared for the first time there that information technology. So the slide you see that is actually taking that of a part of that pylon of the bridge being constructed on a wharf somewhere in the south of the Netherlands, was all made by using steel laser technology, steel laser cutting, uh, um, informed by computer data. Well, this in 94, 92 was very new. Um, and what it also means that you draw these stakeholders very closely together in that network. So after that experience, we changed our name because we had learned from working on this project that the architect is not really the building master, the bouwmeister that maybe has some nostalgic architects would at that time still very much like to see the architect at, but you have to operate in a network, and we had to learn the skills to be very fluent in that network. Next, please. And so this was to us a formative experience. We also, of course, were for the first time intrigued, but ultimately you have to go back to what is that bridge for. This bridge had also many layered meanings. It was meant to be a sort of new magnet to develop the location that it would for the first time open up to. It was meant to become therefore a place that you could recognize and identify with and go to. And it's a connector, of course, simply for, over the water, but also more than that, social connector. Really, it is, yeah, that is what architecture ultimately is about. Connecting people, and that is also maybe by being so in the forefront, pushing for innovation, you are also taking a slightly yeah, edgy position in the discourse, which can lead to a lot of criticism and a lot of struggle. It's not so easy to realize those projects. At the same time, that strengthens the network around that project of stakeholders. So ultimately, you also have a very strong connective function within your network. Next, please. And at the same time, of course, you also have to be very aware of what you want to do yourself. And so when we go to the next key project, that Mercedes-Benz museum, there the technology was advanced, but it was not yet advanced enough for us. We needed it to be already do more. Again, like with the Erasmus Bridge again, we wanted it to do more than it actually could. So in the end, there was a brilliant engineer, Arnold Bals, who himself constructed what is now sort of standard, I suppose, in BIM, a sort of mother model of the Mercedes-Benz Museum, in which you see everything together at the same time. Those programs were not yet on the market at that moment, but this is what we needed. But we also have had our own purpose. We had what you see next to that technological model is our vision of that the museum is actually a trajectory for the visitor to go through and have different experiences. And you can choose what kind of experience you want along the way. You can wander, you can go from one, you can dream, you can look outside, inside, all these things. And that's the most important aspect of it. Again, the technology is to enable that. The technology is not leading in it. Next, please. And furthermore, we were also here testing out an idea that we had long had, and this was of this twist moment. So the Mercedes-Benz Museum is also very much about a spatial ideal, spatial mathematical ideal that we had cherished for a long time and were trying out in project after project after project, many, many lost competitions. And then finally, there were a few projects in which we could try this out, and the Mercedes-Benz Museum is one of them. And the other picture, the big picture you see on the right, is the music hall in Graz, where it's even more pronounced. And then the small picture is a private house in the United States. Next one. And this idea, of the twist and of the enabling and challenging potentials of technology. Mercedes-Benz is even now, still, after more than 10 years after it has been opened, a very strong example of that value, the real value and interest for our profession of engaging with that technology. Next one. Then I think we're moving on. Oh yeah, it's true. It is nice to show. It's good. Runs a bit slow. It's good, better to show the all this the little films. Next we go to the project Marco also mentioned, the Arnhem Central Station, and here too we have the same issue, that in the end it becomes a shipbuilder who builds the project, and we also, beyond the technology, we also have a very strong concept, spatial concept, that carries us through to the entire project. And again, it is a twist, which is, in this case, in the Mercedes-Benz, the twist is already both a structural element and a spatial connector. And in this project of Arnhem Central, if we can go to the next, please. The twist is also a very much distributing, a spatial distributor element, as we can see here. Next, please. I will, I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to really race through the rest of the presentation, because we also want, the questions are always there. That's what I wanted to say with this. We don't want to engage with technology for technology's sake. We really wanted we keep in mind the other aspirations that we have, ideas that we have, but also our social choices and tasks that we have. Next, please. And so Marco already mentioned it as a sort of a next step in what is the next technology. We are interested in experimenting now with the sensory dimension. And next, please. We are working together as UNStudio, especially the urban unit. As Marco said, I'm an urban planner, but I qualified rather later. My first contribution to UNStudio is actually purely theoretical and strategic, and only in the last 10 years we've been bringing urbanism into practice, and have a smaller but growing, doing very well, urban unit also within UNStudio, who is now working with UNSTENS on a new neighborhood in the south of the Netherlands. Next, please. Where we are, gives a small overview of the actual site. Next. And in this, this has a very ambitious program with underlying also a data platform. But the driver, this woman who is also Dean of Technical University, it's all based on her vision of creating smart, sustainable living environment. Next, please. We've just completed a quality manual for this whole neighborhood. Next, please. And in it, this described, it is very much a process of stakeholders, where ultimately the people who are going to live there are actually the designers of both the process, but also the places where they have to be. So the reason why we believe so much in this new technology is that it allows people to take the stakeholders to take even more ownership of what we can do with architecture in this world, and making it more sustainable, more responsible, and use the technology for all these aspects. Next, please. So we go into immense detail on this. For instance, if we want to be truly sustainable and circular, we have to look at how can we deal better with water, with energy. Yeah, next, please. With also our food, and helping people to lead the healthy lifestyles that we want to live. Next, please. So the circular approach really, it will be effective only if everyone engages in it. So we really try to take up all these layers that come into creating a whole new neighborhood and dealing with them in a coherent way. Next, please. Yeah, for instance, looking in detail at all the different ways we need to deal with conserving water, recycling, reusing it, sharing our knowledge in a smart way. So when do I switch on the washing machine, etc. Or that we plan through in enormous detail, yeah, for the whole on the neighborhood level. Next, please. The same goes for food and the productive landscape. We had an analysis done, for instance, on what is the average Dutch diet, to see how can we bring what people, yeah, the food nearer to the production of the food, nearer to the consumption, to create a more sustainable living situation. Next, please. Yeah, so producing of energy sharing, that again does require some also for people to be able to tap into each other's systems and share the knowledge also of what is actually happening, then so that you can really be smart, and you need to. Next. So underlying all it, and this is the most controversial aspect of it, is this data platform where people who live there are also connected. And this is something that has created endless discussions, even questions in the parliament to the minister, because of course there are enormous fears around it because of, yeah, privacy, sensitivity around data sharing, and who, you know, could there be a leak? How can we protect it that these data are only active and can only be used by the people who live there themselves, and that they are not somehow being stolen and made misuse of? And that is one of the biggest risks at the moment, and one of the biggest efforts goes into devising systems to really safeguard that you can use data in the way, your own data, and in the way that you want. And now we are in a sort of a situation where, yeah, we all, of course, have our phones, and we're always looking at how many steps did we make, da da da, all that sort of thing. And at the same time, we don't want anyone else to know. So this is, and now think of that on a bigger scale of neighborhood, where you want to really have the advantages of it, of knowing, you know, the sun shines, we should put on the dishwasher, but not all at the same time, etc. So we should really have a smart system underlying that. And then at the same time, not having, you know, made disadvantage of that. So this is something we are very much into at the moment. Next, please. And very excited about. Again, it's on the edge. We are again really on the edge of doing something that is, yeah, not always understood, not always appreciated, but we have enormous strong community around it at the same time, where a very active participating group of stakeholders, and yeah, we're in the middle of it. So this is the sort of um, very, yeah, early glimpse in the kitchen, which we also like to share and get your feedback on. You know, we want to keep you up to date with every step on the way. And now I would like to hand over to my colleagues, the other UNStudio members who actually know far more about all this stuff, hands-on knowledge than I do. And maybe, please, Sontaya, could you quickly introduce yourself and then please take over the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Caroline, for that really lovely presentation. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's also my first time doing a Zoom lecture, so this is quite interesting. But yeah, I'm a senior architect and associate here at UNStudio. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, but I've been here in Amsterdam for the last 8 years or so, working at the office and with Caroline. Yeah, so my role at the office here is that of design architect, and I lead multiple teams of varying typologies. However, I'm also quite involved in setting the workflow standards and methodologies for our project teams. So the projects I'm working on here at the office vary quite a bit in ranges of scales, sometimes from larger master plans to towers to residential villas, then to even interiors and often product design and furniture design. So today I want to talk to you a bit about our design process at UNStudio and the role that the digital plays within our projects and our approach to the application of digital tooling. And then I think a bit later in the lecture, Nikoleta will talk to you through some of the more specific digital processes. So UNStudio over the last 32 some years, we've been through these huge technological shifts and changes throughout the lifespan of our office. So these technological shifts have really affected our interfaces, our platforms, our workflows, and our softwares, right? Often every 5 years or so, our softwares are changing. But the one thing that has remained constant, I would like to say, is really UNStudio's approach towards critical thinking and problem solving. So in a way, when we approach a project from the beginning, we like to ask the big picture. We like to ask these fundamental questions, and then we look at how the tools can support us in the answers. So some of these questions, similar to what Caroline was mentioning earlier, was how can we design for the future? What is a future-proof environment? And of course, central to what we do, how can we design for people? And how do you also build resiliency into your architecture? And then how do you ultimately create communities? And of course, there's the question and the topic of the race to optimize the profession. So of course, the use of digital tooling has played a very large role in optimizing our profession. So it's kind of interesting to take a look at the cross-section of our projects over the course of time. In, I think, 2008, we started with Raffles, and we had 50-some staff working on the project. And then in 2014, we started working on Wassel Tower with, say, 15+ staff. This was possible because of a really optimized workflow. So actually, it's quite exciting to see what the future really has in store for us. So today I want to talk to you about two projects, and two projects that were heavily reliant on the digital process, and kind of walk you through our approach for each of these projects. So the first one is the Hanwha headquarters in Seoul, South Korea. So this was a competition that we won in 2013, and it was for an office tower renovation. So of course, going back to this big question, these kind of big topics that we like to start off projects with. What is the critical ingredients for these projects? Well, for the Hanwha competition, it was really about how to represent the Hanwha brand, but to also infuse key ingredients into that concept. So creating key ingredients in terms of how do you improve the quality of the space for the occupants? How do you improve the health and wellness for them? How do you create a building that is efficient and sustainable? And as Hanwha is actually the, I think, third largest solar producer or producer of solar panels in the world, how can we integrate their product into our design in a seamless manner? And then of course, lastly, what is a sustainable remodeling? Well, it's actually retrofit in place, which I will talk to you a bit about later as well. So here you can see on the left was the original Hanwha headquarters before the renovation. And then on the right, you see our design upon completion in 2020. So our solution to these big picture questions was to create a responsive facade. So really a facade that combines together multiple parameters such as technical, economical factors, social factors, and sustainability factors. So it's really about zooming into some very technical details such as glare, sun exposure, but then also zooming out and looking at it from more of a social perspective in terms of addressing program requirements and how to create a proper building identity and visibility for the project. So our solution was to create an integrated facade, an integrated solution, whereby the technology and the architecture really somehow becomes fused into one design. So here you can see what we did is we took the solar panels, the Q cells from the Hanwha brand, and we integrated them into our facade module. So to go into a bit more detail on the module distribution and how we also designed the facade, we took into account a few parameters, for instance, program and solar analysis. So program in the fact that we wanted the larger module panels to be reflective of programs. So for instance, public programs such as cafeteria, the CEO spaces, these would need better views out into the city. And then the typical office facade would have the more smaller typical facade panels. So here you can see based off our solar analysis, we also determined that the south facade naturally would be the most optimal place for placing the solar panels. And then we also determined that the solar panels would be more optimum above a specific line in the elevation due to the overshadowing of the surrounding context. So of course, our design is that of a modular facade unit, which is actually fabricated off-site and then brought onto the site and installed. So we needed to create a series of tools which would assist us in rationalizing the module distribution. And I think in the end, we got it down to something like 9 modules actually in the overall. So in order to reduce the fabrication costs, we also needed to optimize the quantity of the modules. And of course, find ways of communicating this information to the local architect, the contractor, the fabricator. So to dive a bit deeper into the modules, each module is actually comprised of, say, 3 floors. And each module is about 1800 millimeters wide. So the need for us to develop multiple modules within the system came from the desire of creating a smooth transition from the I zones, where the public program was, to the remaining portions of the facade. So here actually you can see in the photograph the transition from the I zones, where the public program is and the solar panels are, and that transition that happens in a smooth gradient to the remaining portions of the facade. So in order for us to optimize the process, we needed to create certain scripts which would take in different inputs that we could easily test and adjust the panel sizes. So of course, some of these inputs included, transom positions, dimensions, mullion widths, outer frame dimensions. But this was a way for us to create a tool that could really quickly test these parameters and then output the information ultimately to a 3D model, then finally to 2D drawings for the local architect, the manufacturer, the engineer, and etc. So then moving on to the other topic of, what is the new retrofit methodology? So the client wanted a sustainable renovation methodology, which was not only efficient, but also cost effective. So it was actually decided that the office would remain in operation during the entire renovation process. And actually this type of renovation has not been done before in Seoul. I think it exists probably around the world, but this was the first time that it was done actually in South Korea. And what happens is that the facade is renovated in packages of 3 floors, and then every couple of months, this package moves up, so it enables actually the building to stay in operation during the entire course of the renovation. So it's actually quite amazing. Of course, the process takes a bit longer than normal. I think it was 5 years almost, but I think the result is actually quite efficient and sustainable. So I think it sets a benchmark for a lot of future renovation projects that we'll see. So now I go through a few pictures. This is the landscape and ultimately the facade. So the next project that I want to discuss with you is Wasl Tower. It's a 300-meter mixed-use tower in Dubai at the base of the Burj Khalifa. And it is comprised of hotel, office, residential, and public lobbies. So the kind of the formal design language for this project adopts this classic contrapposto movement. The idea is that it twists so that every facade has a face to the cardinal directions. There's almost this 360-degree variable viewing angle. So while there was a strong formal intent for the tower architecture, the design also developed as a result of multiple environmental factors. So the facade is separated actually into 2 main systems. One portion on the south, which is the heat shield, which is actually absorbing all the incident solar heat gain, and then the other portion of the facade that is on the north that is absorbing less sun. So actually this environmental analysis also led to the development of the form. And of course, also due to the climate and locale of the project, the facade materiality played a really important role. So the building is actually coated with ceramic glazed fins. So it's a way of creating a bit more resiliency to the environment. And then in this diagram, you see the distribution of the south versus the north facade modules. So of course, on the south, we have a 60-40 ratio where 60% is enclosed solid to deal with the heat gain. And on the north portion, it is 60% transparent to allow for more views. And here in plan, you can see the transition from the more deep fins to the more open facade on the north portion. Yeah, so then of course also going into the digital workflow. So I think on beginning any project in the office, we like to do a bit of benchmarking. So I think also to say that our digital strategy for tooling, it really varies project by project. We don't have a very set standard. We kind of adapt to what the project needs. So actually in 2014, when we decided that we wanted to put this project through a Revit workflow, we also benchmarked Dynamo to see if it would be capable of generating all of the 5,500 fins that were on the facade. And at that point in time, we realized that actually the software is not capable of generating the geometry in a timely fashion. So then at that point, we were forced to go with a workflow that comprised of Grasshopper, Rhino, and then the geometry is pipelined into Revit for documentation. So I mean, I think nowadays, with the change in technology, it could have been a different methodology, but it's more about kind of custom tailoring the workflow to the project at the time. So this diagram shows our master work file. And kind of our master work file builds in a layer of redundancy into our workflow so that new people coming into the office can very quickly acclimate to the project and get familiar with the project. So it's essentially the master file that has all of the control curves related to Grasshopper, so that actually if you were to move any of these lines, the slab floor to floor heights would change, the facade pattern would update. So it really is kind of the base file for this geometry. So this page shows also a bit of the level of detail that we like to build into our 3D models in Rhino. And this can also be transferred into Revit and ultimately sent out to the manufacturer and fabricators. And of course, the use of tooling to solve issues like mullion deviations, glazing panel deviations, and application of solar fin typologies. So here are a few photographs from the construction site. This was, I think, December 2018. And actually, this was a few weeks ago. So as you can see, the floor plates are progressing quite nicely. You can start to see the twist in the tower form. Yeah, these are some photographs from the mock-up that show the ceramic fins. And also on the right, you can see a bit of the step deviation in the facade panels. And yeah, this shows the mechanical fixings for the louvers. And these are ultimately some of the material samples for the ceramics that we were studying. So it's going up quite quickly, and I think the construction should be finished probably 2021. So I think that's it for me, and I will hand off now to Nikoleta, and she can talk a bit more about the tool-specific processes that we use at the office.
Hello from me. I'm Nikoleta. I am from Athens, Greece. I am a junior architect here at UNStudio. I have been working here for 7 months. I came from a completely different environment. I came from the academic environment. I was at the Institute for Advanced Architecture, Catalonia, in the computational design team, supporting master students and supporting the institute's projects. I will be talking today about the tool-specific process of UNStudio. I will be talking about the tools in 3 different scales. I will be talking about 3 different projects that are in 3 different scales and how the different tools were used during the design process. Firstly, I would like to set a question that is being answered through the tool used by each project. So firstly, I would like to talk about optimization algorithms and whether unoptimized geometry is the one that is finally chosen by the architect. I will be talking about this case study project. Our site is at the center. On the west, we have a playground. On the right, we have a park, I'm sorry. And the concept was to connect the playground with the park through this path while positioning 2 towers on our site, 2 mixed-use towers. So how do you choose the positioning of the towers? The objective was to cast the minimum amount of shadows on the playground while maximizing the views towards the park from the tower. So using the UNS solar tools and view tools, we were able to see the different shadows and views towards the park. The blue color means maximum views, the red color means the least views. But what happens when you try to combine the views and the shadows? This is something I set up quickly for this lecture. So using different algorithms, using different plugins in Grasshopper, and trying to optimize the exact same definition, you get completely different results. That's because each plugin has a different algorithm running behind. So how does the architect really know what is the optimized version? This is where we have to be critical, because I think it's a trap that many junior designers fall into, running optimization algorithms and just getting what the software says is the optimum result and not being critical towards it. Next, I would like to talk about complex geometries and whether softwares like Grasshopper are the only way to get there. This is the Terminal 3 Taiwan International Airport. This is a proposal of UNStudio. And most people would think that a curved complex geometry like this would probably come out of a Grasshopper script. But in reality, it just came from a very simple process of subdivision modeling and projection modeling. Subdivision modeling is now inherent in Rhino. When this project was done, it was using T-splines. And what is the main concept is that by using simple quad meshes, you can have smooth NURBS polysurfaces. So the process in order to design the terminal was to have a very basic polygon base, extrude the edges, have some edge loops for additional control, and then make a 3D grid where you can control the heights in a higher definition. Then an axial symmetry is applied in order to avoid the extra work, since the design was symmetrical. And then you are able to get the network rebuilt, surface rebuilt to quad-sided NURBS. So this was the final design of the terminal. But when we go to the inside, there's an added level of detail. In order to achieve that and not go back to subdivision modeling, we go to projection modeling. The methodology is very simple. So by using curves or extruded surfaces projected in different planes, you can trim the initial very simple polysurface and have a very clean result. So in order to create the funnels, this is the departures funnel. We took a part of the roof, cut out used the curves to cut out the funnel, and then projecting and trimming in different planes, lofting the curves, and then giving thickness by projecting the same curve with an offset. The same technique was also used in order to apply different patterns and different materials on the surfaces. And you get this very complex interior design that has come out not of a grasshopper script, but from very simple methodologies and with a very clean result. Last but not least, I would like to talk about the UNStudio tower lobby, and I'm going to be focusing on the chandelier in the center. So this chandelier is a wayfinding device. You can see on the right and the left of the picture, the lobby has two different entrances. So the chandelier works as a wayfinding device to find the elevators and to find the reception desk. It is composed by a milled Korean surface, high density foam, which is milled, and then about 4,000 copper tubes. Some pictures from the construction. So the digital tools come here in order to do some geometry rationalization. The issue with the construction was that the tower was in use while this renovation was happening, so it needed to be fast. The Korean and the high density foam were pre-milled, so brought to the construction site and placed, but the tubes had to be placed one by one. In order to rationalize the 4,000 tubes, they were divided into categories, in 10 different categories, ranging from 60 millimeters of length to 600 millimeters of length. They were all tagged, and that made the construction process much easier, much faster. This is part of the script that was used for one of the panels of the tubes. And this is the final product. Thank you.
So yeah, I think that wraps it up from our end. So.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for your inspiring talk, all three of you, bridging from the design thinking to the workflow and the details of your project at UNStudio. Highly inspiring, I must say. I think we have the floor open now for our questions, so everybody is warmly invited to pick up the microphone and take the opportunity to have a question about the work at UNStudio. Maybe it's also possible to ask the question in German and we try to translate if somebody feels better with that. Maybe while you think about a question, I could start with one. I was wondering, in the whole design development of UNStudio, there was always this focus on the human-centered design approach. And around that, technology serves as some kind of connector. And if I understood right, in the last project, especially in the one that you presented with a participative approach involving all the people and using data to connect these people. I was wondering if we as architects are becoming more and more data scientists to be part of this time and be also future-proof.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it, and yeah, I think once again we architects are not the first in the line to to get there. And we are in this data era already, and also everything around us is already full of chips and bits. They are already there, and we are not the ones in control of it. We are, yeah, more and more of what we could do is being done by the big technology firms, and they have a completely different agenda. They don't have as an agenda, which architecture traditionally have, is what UNStudio, yes, subscribes to that. It's people-centered, human-centered approach. But that is what I think we are all trained, every architect is trained to be thinking like that. We have a social responsibility, and we, yeah, that is what we also what motivates us, and so yeah, we should be taking it on and not letting it go, because it's a huge part of the built environment already. So that, I think that is what we feel. There are opportunities there. We have, people do embrace it naturally, but with reservations. But there are yeah, massive opportunities there, and it's part of our time. So it is for architecture to ignore something that is now so central, occupies such a central space in all our lives. How can we as architects pretend it doesn't exist? We have to engage with it. And I think as Sontaya and Nikoleta also show, it's not very easy. Obviously, it's another task for architects to have to become familiar with and learn about it. So it's only, you know, it's again a lot of work, and you need to be very smart to learn to deal with all these new technologies and become fluent in them. But it's there to overcome. I think so, yeah. But I can also imagine, I don't know if how, I would like to hear from the students also how you feel about all this, because there's also everywhere a lot of resistance at the same time. Not everyone. We would really like to hear what your ideas about it are, and what are your worries, what are your fears, what you think is not good about this, or how should we be careful? How do you feel? What do you think about this, all this?
So the floor is open. The question is up to the audience.
Yes, so we do it the other way around, like everything. We are going to ask the questions. Yeah, no, but yeah. So it would be interesting to hear what your views are, because it's you know, we have very strong reservations also ourselves. You know, we don't want to be mindless about it, but at the same time we also experimenters. So yeah. Yeah. You can also type your question, can't you, in as a chat? Be anonymous. Yeah, it's anyway.
I think the experiment you mentioned is something that we discussed in the lecture 2 weeks ago, where we had Jan Knippers from the University in Stuttgart. He's working with Achim Menges. You probably are familiar with his work in the experimental pavilions. And he said that the experiment is something where architecture can develop on. Of course, questioning always the status quo is something that if everybody would do that, I think we would lose maybe also some kind of certainty or some curiosity. But I think that's a good strategy to question the status quo and go, as you mentioned, to the edges to see how far the profession of an architect could be stretched. Basically, this is something we're also discussing within the group of our university. So what is the strategy for the education of the next generation, which is kind of a dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and now with this, particular situation, how is it? How is that affecting? Will it be like the previous crisis of 2008? That it's also, the smaller independent architectural practice is increasingly under threat. It wasn't very good for those smaller practices, that crisis, and we also feel always quite a lot of pressure to be to be a forceful and stable and strong partner, because it seems to be what most of the market actually prefers in an architect, but it runs a little bit counter to some to how, on the other hand, we also envisage what an architect should be. So I think it's quite problematic, really. I'm not embracing that kind of change from pure love of it, but it's part of our world. But to me, it's one of the things I find most difficult. That it's very difficult to practice in ways that were maybe more common in the past. But I mean, it might, on the other hand, there might be opportunities now for what then everyone's talking about, the reset. Can we reset that? I mean, could that be a possibility? It would be very interesting to see if a new generation would manage to re-establish an architectural practice in other ways. That would be something I would be very interested in to see. And also then what are the thoughts and the ideals, and what would you want to achieve with architecture, if you could have another kind of practice that was not that heavily maybe global and that bought into technology that much, for instance.
I think Cedric Price once said technology is the answer, but what was the question? I think if we shift that focus to the question, we will be able to find solutions.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Okay, now we got a question. It's nice. So maybe I read it. I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but maybe I read it for all of you. It's from Lasse, who asked, in my workflow, it's always hard to find the right way between modeling by feet, let's say, or going into programmed model. As of course, a more complicated way can be, but is not always the best one. It's a statement from the side. But maybe Sontaya and Nikoleta, you could maybe give a view from your side. So what would be the right moment to start diving into programming?
If I understand the question or that kind of statement properly, it's maybe from what I read, it's a bit of kind of what is the right combination between having a humanistic attachment or a humanistic understanding of the digital model, also contrasted to the digital model, right? What is kind of the difference between the human and the digital. Is that, if I'm reading the statement correctly, was that the intention perhaps?
Maybe Lasse can comment on that. I see he picked up.
Don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that wasn't. I think it's always good if you have the chance to do it, because if you aren't in the way to decide if you want to use it. So I see it, as the right way to have the capability, the chance to do it, and then to decide if it's the right way in this special case. Yeah, so in my opinion, it's very good to have the opportunities and then to decide it.
I mean, I think as architects, you know, we of course work very detailed in the digital realm, but there is something I think very valuable also about going out and experiencing spaces in person and really being able to kind of understand the relationship between the human scale and the digital scale. I think that's actually one of the most important aspects, especially for young designers that are also just starting out, is to be able to really kind of create a relationship between the real versus the digital, and to be able to really translate that into the digital so that you really design with that in mind as well, because it is also about a sense of scale and a sense of understanding of the kind of human perception of space, and then also how do we translate that into the digital.
Yeah. So.
I would like to ask one question. You told us you thought it was very important, and I think it's very important as well, to be critical with yourself, be critical with the results of your studies. Dealing with digital technologies, dealing with sustainability in these processes, our studies are often based on assumptions. We have to put in assumptions into our programs and then see what results we can generate. And on the basis of these this information we generate in this study process, we take decisions and build buildings. How do you self-assess yourself? How do you self-assess your processes or the final buildings, the finished buildings after sort of completing the buildings? Are there any certain ways of sort of cross-checking and checking whether your assumptions were right, or whether the final building kind of reflects the digital studies you did beforehand?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good topic, and it kind of revolves around the question of these post-occupancy studies. Is, you know, how can you make use of the data that is existing to really analyze and support your assumptions, you know, at the end result compared to the beginning. And I think the more we can really make use of this data to understand kind of the implications of our decisions, the more we can start making these informed decisions. I mean, I think with the Hanwha headquarters, we're just now completing the final energy calculations to understand actually, how much more efficient the building has become now with the new facades and with the solar panels. And I think the initial studies we should be getting fairly soon, but it actually is quite a decent amount of percentage increase in terms of the efficiency. So with Hanwha, we're already trying to do this to kind of understand actually the results of our decisions in kind of the final post-occupancy studies. So
you get the chance to monitor the finished building for a while, for sort of a year or two? Do you get the chance of receiving data from the actual building, which is running on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the idea for Hanwha is that we would monitor this for a while to really understand the implications of the
that's great.
It's something we are getting into to not say, oh, this is finished now and we're out of here. We would like to. It's not, you know, a regular part of the architect's brief at the moment. So again, as a society, we have to move. towards seeing that more, you know, it's about the performance of the building is much more important than, yeah, than that moment when it is finished. So it's quite a big shift. So when you asked about self-criticality, and then Sontaya answered, it made me really think how interesting it is, because I think, again, traditionally, an architect would have understood that in sort of aesthetic terms. Did you like, in the end, the result? And then, like, you know, Ayn Rand, the Fountainhead, the architect who was not satisfied because his grand vision had been compromised, he would destroy his own building. And now, so criticality and assessments is beginning to take on new meanings, far beyond what the architect likes or doesn't like, because who cares? Yeah.
Is there also a link to the motivation to starting UN Sense? Because as we just said, probably architects are driven by the design, and if the building is constructed, they do their photos and then they disappear. And the performative aspect is one part, of course. How does it perform in energy performance? But of course, taking a humanistic approach, you should monitor your building also with the users and the people that live there.
Yeah.
Is there something in the UN Sense that is working in that direction?
Yeah, it very much about health and well-being, and we've done, you know, on a small scale, like installation and exhibition pieces about that, about how a built environment can affect your emotional well-being, for instance, and how you improve it so you feel better, and these could be measurable instances. It depends, of course, also how interested is the user in that. But for instance, from one building in the Netherlands, yeah, the director is always saying, I don't know for sure, but that there's much less sick leave now, for instance, in that building than there had been in the previous building of that client. So there are ways we can measure, are people doing well in there? Yeah. Tatjana has come on.
Okay. By accident, but I think Andreas maybe picked up the phone, is that right?
Put a question now. Caroline, what do you think about the importance of allegoric or symbolic or metaphorical affairs in architecture? How important is it? And how do you get it into the buildings while working with digital techniques?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Many things that we talk about in architecture is often metaphoric, like the lungs of the city. A park is the lungs of the city, etc. So we are, I think, still quite used to using a lot of metaphor to express what we want to achieve. I think, yeah, this is it's good to try to think about it and lose maybe the metaphor and the allegory, but to think about the real effect you want to achieve for the people using it. Maybe that I think would be more maybe compatible with when you think about using technology to achieve that.
So it's more or less the purpose or the visibility of the function that makes a building metaphorical.
Yeah, did you have a specific example in mind, or what are you thinking about? How should I visualize it for myself?
The Elbphilharmonie by Herzog de Meuron is such a, it was done a little bit, yeah, more or less with digital methods or digital matters, and but it has just an a way of reading its content behind the normal forms, because it has a high philosophical approach, I think. It's the idea of a frozen ice block who has something to do with music and so on. All these things might make it to a metaphor in between the urban context. And that's a typical way Herzog de Meuron, for instance, work.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you whether you have similar ideas, or whether the idea of a metaphor comes out in another way.
Well, I think that's a beautiful building, and I know that, you know, they often work with artists also in their history. You know, it's very deeply ingrained in their practice. So I don't think you can so easily. It's very specific practice, you know, of Herzog and de Meuron, and well, the same Jean Nouvel. I think his building in Abu Dhabi, I saw. I think it's beautiful. It is also a metaphor of this desert rose. It is a fantastic experience being in that building. So yeah, I would, if you ask me outright, as you did, I would be a bit wary, because, you know, it can be in a very postmodernist, very direct quotation way. And then, yeah, I think it's very little to do sometimes with architecture when it's like that, but these are, you know, very good, incredible masters, you know, who built each of them some fantastic masterpieces. So the masterpiece is always the exception. I think we can't draw a rule from it. It's just a masterpiece. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Maybe a link could be, I know that UNStudio is working very much with design models, which are not purely like spatial exercises, but they are carriers of principles somehow, which could be applied in different situations. So taking the twist as a connector, for example, has this kind of strong emphasis on how you connect different spaces with each other. So in that way, I think it's not metaphorical in the sense of that it creates an image that you can transfer, but it's some kind of method that is coming from a spatial experience. And there, I think with the design models you developed at UNStudio, you have kind of a range of experiences from projects that you try to bring further. However, what something like this could also lead to is that someone falls very much in love with one of these things, and the metaphor disappears, but the shape is still there. I mean, there's also this kind of danger, maybe.
Yeah. But it's true that there is that aspect, luckily, to architecture, very mysterious, intuitive part of it. That I think also in the Arnhem station, for instance, there's some of these big gestures. They are very sculptural as well. So that I think is not that much room for that in the contemporary discourse of architecture. We don't know how to talk about it in the right way, because it also then is counter to the idea that you work for people. So how to, it's quite tricky. At the same time, I think it's very important. You cannot discard it either. It's good to also cultivate it for students in yourself, I think.
Actually, we have a question from a student, from Taoda. Taoda, are you there? She's a Japanese exchange student we have in our master course. You want to ask a question by yourself?
Yes, but yeah. So, I'm Japanese exchange student, and I would like to ask, like, what areas of expert do you have on your team for each project, like Korean project and also like environment project? And also, I'm really interested in what areas expert do you think you need in the future? Because sometimes I also learning technology way to solve architecture problem, but also feel like my knowledge is not enough to get new ideas because I just learning about architecture and architecture way, architecture perspective. Yeah, so I just would like to ask that question.
Okay, maybe Nikoleta and Sontaya, do you want to also respond to it? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, our office is actually quite multicultural in that we have people really coming in from all over the world. But also our office has different departments which are also specializing in different areas such as futures, the knowledge platforms, UNSense, or even urban design or interiors. So actually we also like to think that we bring in colleagues with many different views on architecture. And yeah, within our office, it's not always that the person with that one specialty is only doing that. We're all quite flexible, and we do move around. Like for instance, I started off as an architect, and now I'm also doing quite a bit of interiors. So in a way, you learn from your colleagues, and you also learn new skill sets. So I think actually this kind of collaborative environment at UNStudio really kind of contributes to the melding of different knowledge. And for instance, if you don't have the knowledge, the studio provides an environment where you can actually reach out your feelers and find someone that does have that knowledge or that can help you brainstorm and come up with solutions to your questions.
Yeah, that's very nice answer. That, yeah, I think as an architect you can be quite versatile. You can become a specialist. You can become a generalist. You can move towards a new area such as futurology and so on. So it doesn't, I think, mean that that architects are going to be superfluous in the future and going to be replaced by other professions, but architects can reinvent themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And also, can I ask, like, so what experts do you think you need in the future in your company? So, not like, I just like curious about that one too.
Yeah. Well, so we have now also some new people who have been trained as futurists and who are, for instance, know about processes around decision making, for instance. Those kind of new expertises are now coming into our studio, and probably a little bit more of that. Very smart people are always welcome, I think. Yeah, so it is good to be able to be a good thinker. That I think is something that is quite valuable in the future. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for answering. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there are any other questions.
No.
No more. So I would say thanks again very much for your talk, your presentation, and the insights in the workflow. Greetings to Amsterdam. And I think Sabine will close the session for us then.
Yes. Okay, I also can say the same as Marco. Thank you so much for being with us, for being from Amsterdam and from London to join us. And I saw we are round about, you asked me before how many people we expect. I said 100, and of course we get 101. So it's
excellent. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we all did our first Zoom lecture and we enjoyed it very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All the best. All the best to all of you. Take good care, all of everyone.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Greetings to studio.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Caroline.
So, Sabinchen. Jetzt verabschieden
So.
wir die anderen auch noch.
Mach das.
Hm? Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Bis morgen.
Bis morgen.
Guten Abend.
Gerne.
Tschüss
Dir auch.
allen. Ciao. Macht's gut.
Tschüss.